I wonder if a kingdom could combat COVID more effectively than other forms of government. What do you think? Comparisons have been abundant, haven't they? Comparing the US with Western Europe was popular for a while. Why can't we handle things more like them? Last week, after total population differences were taken into account, their death totals were 75% higher than the United States. I wonder why the glowing accounts of Europe have evaporated. A hospital executive interviewed for an article in the New Yorker the other day spoke frankly. The only way you can eradicate the virus with today's tools is if you're a totalitarian government or on an island. New Zealand would be a good example of an island, which of course isn't a form of government, but a geographical fact. Totalitarianism is a form of government, found, for example, in China, which has been praised by many for their ability to deal with the coronavirus. Whether they're successful long-term will be apparent in time, but current success comes at a price. Totalitarianism is a form of government in which the state has total control over its citizens. An older example of this is the communist regime of the USSR, with its prison camps, KGB, and thought police, which assured that its citizens spoke as upstanding socialist comrades should speak. Control the words, and you control the thoughts. China, with its technological prowess, is a much more advanced form of totalitarianism. As recorded in the new book, Live Not by Lies, television cameras are found everywhere on Chinese streets. Beijing software is so advanced that it can easily check facial scans against the central security database. If a citizen enters an area forbidden to him, a church, say, or even if a person is merely walking in the opposite direction of a crowd, the system automatically records it and alerts the police. China's social credit system automatically tracks the words and actions online and off of every Chinese citizen and grants rewards or demerits based on obedience. A Chinese who does something socially positive, helping an elderly neighbor with a chore or listening to a speech of leader Xi Jinping, receives points toward a higher social credit score. On the other hand, one who does something negative, letting his or her dog poop on the sidewalk, for example, or making a snarky comment on social media, suffers a social credit downgrade. Those with lower scores find daily life harder. They aren't allowed to buy high-speed train tickets or take flights. Doors close to certain restaurants. Their children may not be allowed to go to college. They may lose their job and have a difficult time finding a new one. And if you're related to the offender, you could be downgraded too. Does potentially eradicating the virus more quickly sound to you as though it's worth surrendering so much to the state? Keep that in mind the next time China is praised. Thankfully, we live in a democracy. The word democracy comes from demos, which means people or common people, and kratos, which means strength or rule, the rule of the common people. And how is our democracy founded and how is it sustained? Do you remember that lesson? What does the preamble say? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We, the people, do ordain. That's a collective act, a communal willing of a new union. It was formed and is sustained because as a people we chose it and continue to choose it. Our union depends on the will of the people, which rests on the self-evident truths in the Declaration of Independence and is given shape in the Constitution, the basic way of life willed by the people. Our nation depends on the will of the people. Choice is essential, but notice that in our founders' minds, the legitimacy of choice rests on truths held self-evident, truths not of our own making. That's why we found it legitimate to throw off England, because they were violating these truths, also known as natural law, laws written into nature and discoverable by the human mind. Our democracy has proven to be an extraordinary opportunity, but it's not a fail-safe possibility because it's not a self-sustaining system progressing inevitably to better and better days. John Adams, a founding father and our second president, wrote, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." You see, there are powers, there are passions at work in us which will have a destructive effect without religion and morality. Those people who will not be governed by God will be ruled by tyrants, wrote William Penn, a founding father. The will of the people, left to the people's own devices, the ability to choose without limitations, results not in freedom, but in tyranny, not necessarily with citizens being ruled by a human tyrant, but by an idea that says you should be able to choose whatever you want. The reference point becomes not self-evident truths written in nature to which all are bound, but truths deemed as such because a sufficient number of influential people have decided, have consented to, have willed that it is that way because they say so. People who begin to dictate what language and terms are acceptable to use, as in the hearings of Justice Barrett, or in the assigning of phobias to people who don't agree with some in the media or sports or TV. Thought police now censor what qualifies as hate or bigoted speech on social media with no more substantial justification than that some people didn't like how it made them feel. There's the reference point, not self-evident truths, but the absolute authority of the individual, as long as the individual agrees with the dominant narrative. If they don't, then they're outlawed or canceled or intimidated, as with a pizzeria whose Christian owner said they would not cater a same-sex wedding since it violated their beliefs. Threats came, as did a tweet calling people to burn down the pizza place. But in the end, fire wasn't necessary as the owners closed their doors in fear. It happened with the state of Indiana when it tried to pass a religious freedom bill aimed at protecting businesses sued for anti-gay discrimination. Apple and others threatened economic retaliation, and so Indiana dropped the bill. It happened just the other day with Target, which stopped selling a well-researched book on transgenderism after 2 Twitter complaints. I think Target has changed their mind, but who knows for how long if additional pressure comes. Now, I bought that book, and I'm halfway through it. Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. If you have kids, you really must read it. Craze here is used in a technical sense, as I understand it. It's used to indicate the fact that what's being seen is not due to any sort of condition, but to impressionable young minds who are socially isolated and who have not been given a firm foundation on which to build their identities. They come across what are called influencers on YouTube, for example, and soon begin to present themselves as transgender, making up stories to give credence to this as coached by their influencers. Then, like music, which becomes popular in a group of friends because one person begins to listen to it, so too with transgenderism. The craze phenomenon erupts, and most of the friend group jumps on the transgender bandwagon with devastating effects. Now, the speed at which this has become mainstream is unbelievable. In California, high schoolers can announce they're transgender at school, change their name, and even begin receiving hormone replacements, all without the schools telling the parents. And if the news is communicated to the parents, they are told by the school that their place is to support whatever their child chooses. The individual's choice, even if he or she is a minor, as long as it's backed by the beliefs of the day, is absolute. It's the will of the people. Unless you dismiss this as just California, here are a few examples. This was shared with me from our own ESU, from a class that I'm told that every education major must take. Here's the assignment: Transgender Oppression Action Plan. For this assignment, reflect on all the topics we've read and discussed on transgender oppression and gender. Identify 2 ways in which you can interrupt transgender oppression in the future. The action plans for interrupting transgender oppression should be realistic in terms of your willingness and ability to carry out the plans. Describe each plan in detail. What is the exact plan? Who's involved in this plan? What are your aspirations with this plan? What obstacles can you imagine would impede your implementing these plans? On a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not comfortable at all and 5 being completely comfortable, how would you rate your comfort level with taking action that is stopping transgender oppression when you see it, and why? Just a couple days ago, I was sent a complimentary exercise, one that complements this one from the same class, that discusses ways to disrupt, counteract what I am currently doing. There are your tax dollars at work supporting convictions not based on hard sciences to which everyone must bow if they seek to be a member. There's the future, except the future is already here. A couple years ago, this was shared with Catholic school principals because it was used in a nearby Kansas public school district to help elementary school students decide what their gender identity is. The debate, I guess, as I understand it, goes on whether or not the school actually has to communicate what they're doing to the parents or involve them in the discussion. All rooted in nothing more significant than the individual's choice, and protected by appealing to one's feelings and by labeling other views as oppression. Now, if you think what I'm saying is political in any way, just recall our gospel with Jesus the King, a political figure, sitting upon a throne judging all the nations. You are right, you are wrong. You are good, you are not. That must mean that there is truth and that we have access to it if he is to judge fairly. But it also means we cannot manipulate its veracity by gathering a sufficient number of people who express their wills in a contrary way. And what's more, notice that in this example in the gospel, the criteria used for eternal judgment regards the activity of people outside the walls of a church. God's kingdom is not confined to worship, although it certainly includes it, but his kingdom is all-encompassing. And as our founders knew, and as we will discover more and more, being religious, living according to the laws of God's kingdom, does not oppress, but frees us and protects us from totalitarian overreach and the tyranny of unrestrained choice.